The warning ignored. In the vast reaches of the galaxy, where powerful alien empires ruled with iron fists, there was a growing sense of dominance. For centuries, the alien species had expanded their territories, crushing smaller civilizations with ease. Their technology was advanced, their warships massive, and their fleet nearly unstoppable. Their confidence in their power was unmatched, and they believed no force could challenge their supremacy. One such empire, the Zarath, was preparing for yet another expansion into an uncharted system. Led by Supreme Commander Zoreth, they had conquered many worlds in their pursuit of power. The Zarath were feared across the galaxy. Their ships were built to withstand the toughest battles, their weapons designed to decimate any opposition. Every time they encountered a new civilization, their enemies crumbled before them. But as they advanced towards the edge of their empire, a strange message came through their communication channels. It was an encrypted transmission from an unknown source. It wasn't the kind of message that came from any civilization they had encountered before. The message was brief, a simple warning. Human warships are unstoppable. The message was cryptic, and there were no further details. It didn't mention who had sent it or what it meant, but it was clear enough. Human warships. The words felt odd, unfamiliar. The Zarath had never heard of humans, let alone human warships. The message felt almost like a threat, but the Zarath were not the type to be frightened by vague warnings. Supreme Commander Zoreth dismissed it immediately. He had no reason to believe that humans, whoever they were, could pose any real threat. The Zarath had crushed empires far older and more powerful than anything a race of humans could ever build. In his eyes, the warning was nothing more than an attempt to delay their conquest, a small, insignificant race trying to scare them into turning back. "Send a reply," Zoreth ordered, his voice calm and filled with authority. "Tell them we are coming. Tell them they will be crushed like all the others before them." The message was sent, a simple declaration of the Zarath's power. Zoreth's fleet was ready, and there was no turning back. The thought of human warships seemed laughable to him. Meanwhile, on a distant planet in the same galaxy, humans were unaware of the impending threat. Their world was far less advanced compared to the Zarath. They had their technology, their ships and their weapons, but they had never encountered such a powerful enemy before. Humanity had faced challenges before, but this would be unlike any threat they had ever experienced. Back in the Zarath Empire, the fleet was already on its way. Hundreds of massive ships, each one the size of a small moon, sailed through space. Their weapons were primed, their engines roaring with power. They were confident, their eyes set on the next conquest. Nothing could stop them now. As the fleet approached the coordinates of the human system, the warning message continued to echo in their minds. Some of the officers in Zoreth's fleet had begun to question the strange transmission. It didn't sit right with them, but the Supreme Commander was unshaken. To him, it was just a trivial annoyance, a blip on the radar of their conquest. They would destroy this human race and move on to the next system. But as they neared the human system, a sense of tension began to fill the air. The Zarath didn't understand it yet, but something was different. There was a quiet hum of anticipation in the depths of space. In the command center of one of the Zarath warships, Zoreth stood, watching the vast expanse of stars. He thought of the worlds they had already conquered, the battles they had won with ease. The humans were nothing compared to the great empires he had already crushed. "Prepare for immediate attack," he said, turning to his officers. "Nothing will stop us now." As they entered the human system, they noticed something strange. There were no signs of life, no huge fleets of ships, no massive defense systems waiting for them. For a moment, Zoreth thought the humans were simply hiding, preparing for a sneak attack. But then, a signal came through. It wasn't a fleet of ships, but a single small ship. A tiny human vessel appeared on their radar, and it moved with surprising speed. Zoreth's officers exchanged glances. They had never seen anything like it. "Is this their fleet?" one officer asked. Zorath sneered. "Hardly," he said. "This is nothing. Destroy it." But before the order could be given, something incredible happened. The tiny human vessel suddenly accelerated, darting between the massive Zorath ships like a dart through the air. It moved with impossible agility, dodging laser fire and slipping past the defensive systems of the Zorath warships. For the first time, Zorath felt a strange sense of unease. The human ship wasn't just fast, it was more than a match for their defenses. As it dodged their attacks, it began to send strange signals back to the rest of the fleet, signals that made the Zorath pause for a moment. And then it hit Zorath. The warning, the strange message. The humans were not what they seemed. There was something more to them, something powerful, something that had been underestimated. The warning had been real, and now it was too late to turn back. A humble beginning. As the Zorath fleet loomed over the human system, a strange calm filled the human command center. The humans were preparing, but they were not as ready as they had hoped. Their warships, though powerful in their own right, were no match in size or strength to the mighty Zorath ships. But the humans were not deterred. They were not a race that would easily bend or break under pressure. The small human fleet, led by Captain Thomas Harris, was comprised of just a handful of warships. They were the remnants of a previous conflict, battle-hardened and scarred, but still carrying with them the will to survive. Their mission was clear: defend Earth at all costs. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, and the weight of that responsibility was not taken lightly. Captain Harris stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Invincible. The ship was small compared to the colossal Zorath warships, but it was fast, maneuverable, and packed with advanced weaponry. Harris wasn't sure it would be enough, but he had no choice but to lead his crew into battle. His face was grim, his eyes sharp with determination. The lives of his crew, his family, and his world depended on his decisions. "All systems are go, Captain," his second-in-command, Lieutenant Sarah Blake, reported. "We're ready for combat." Harris nodded, his thoughts racing. They had received the mysterious warning about the Zorath. But even now, he didn't fully understand what made these aliens so dangerous. He had fought in wars before, and he had seen countless battles. But this felt different. The Zorath were unlike any enemy they had ever faced. The human warships had been built for defense, not conquest. They were designed to protect their planet, to defend against invaders like the Zorath. But Captain Harris knew that even the best defense could fall if it wasn't backed by strength, strategy, and determination. The aliens would not be easy to defeat. "We won't win by brute force alone," Harris said, his voice steady. "We need to outsmart them. We need to keep them on the defensive." Blake looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "How do you propose we do that, Captain?" Harris turned to face her, his expression hardening. "We don't fight them like they expect us to. We use our speed, our agility. We make them chase us, make them waste their resources. We hit them where they least expect it." The crew, standing at their stations, were tense but focused. They had trained for moments like this, but the reality of battle was always more intense than any simulation. As the first human warship prepared to launch from the fleet, the tension in the air was palpable. The crew knew they were about to face an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. But despite their fear, there was one thing that the humans had that the Zorath did not: their will to fight for survival. The humans didn't care how big the enemy was. They didn't care about the odds. They had one goal in mind: defend their world. As Harris looked out of the bridge windows at the vast blackness of space, he knew that this battle would be like no other. The Zorath had underestimated them, thinking their warships were little more than fragile toys in comparison to the might of their own fleet. But humans had something that no alien species could predict: a will to fight, to never give up, no matter the cost. "Prepare for launch," Harris ordered. "We faced them head-on, but we're not going to play by their rules. Let's show them what humanity is capable of." The crew of the Invincible nodded in silent agreement. The time had come to prove that humans were not the helpless, primitive race that the Zerath thought they were. The warships of humanity may have been small, but they were built with a strength that no alien could see coming. They were ready to fight, and they were ready to win. The human fleet moved into position, taking up strategic locations across the system. They were prepared to strike quickly and then vanish into the void, using their speed to stay out of the grasp of the overwhelming alien forces. Every ship, every soldier, was ready for the fight of their lives. As the Zerath fleet approached, the humans held their breath. The battle was about to begin, and the fate of their world was hanging by a thread. The quiet hum of the engines echoed through the command deck, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. "We'll make them regret underestimating us," Captain Harris muttered under his breath, his eyes fixed on the distant stars ahead. And as the first shots were fired, the humans knew that this was only the beginning of a war that would forever change the course of history. They were not going to go down without a fight. The first clash. The first exchange of fire was sudden, chaotic, and unlike anything the humans had ever experienced. The Zerath fleet was massive, their warships appearing like monstrous shadows against the backdrop of space. Their weapons fired in quick bursts, devastating everything they hit. But the humans had a plan, one that relied on speed and maneuverability. Captain Harris watched intently as his fleet moved into position, each ship carefully aligned and ready to unleash their first volley. The Zerath ships, for all their size and strength, were not designed for the kind of guerrilla tactics that the humans were now employing. "All ships, engage at full throttle," Harris commanded, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Target the lead ship and fire on my mark." The human warships, swift and agile, darted toward the massive alien fleet, firing their advanced weapons in precision bursts. The Zerath were caught off guard. Their ships were used to overwhelming their enemies with brute force. But the humans weren't standing still. Instead, they moved with lightning speed, dodging laser blasts and weaving through the gaps in the alien defenses. It was like a dance, and the humans were the ones leading. The first shots from the human fleet hit their targets, alien warships that had previously been thought impenetrable. The weapons of the humans weren't as powerful as the Zerath's, but they were precise. The humans focused their fire on the weaker points of the alien ships, avoiding the heavily armored areas and aiming for vulnerable engines and weapon systems. Direct hit on their shields, Blake reported, her voice tight with excitement. "Their forward shields are down by 40%. Harris's heart raced. It was working. The strategy was paying off. But the battle was far from over. The Zerath quickly adjusted, their ships swarming to retaliate. The immense firepower of the Zerath warships began to rain down on the human fleet. A barrage of laser blasts filled the air, lighting up the dark expanse of space. The humans had to keep moving, dodging, and weaving to avoid the deadly barrage. The Invincible rocked violently as an explosion ripped through its side. Sparks flew across the bridge, and the lights flickered. Harris gritted his teeth. He had to remain calm. They couldn't afford to lose focus now. "Status report," he shouted over the chaos. "Minimal damage, Captain," Blake replied, her hands flying over the control panels. "Shield integrity holding at 70%. We can still fight." "Good," Harris replied, his voice low. "Keep moving. Don't give them a target." Meanwhile, the alien fleet had begun to regroup. Despite their earlier shock, the Zerath were not used to being challenged. Their leaders were beginning to understand that the humans were not as helpless as they had initially believed. The humans had managed to inflict serious damage on the Lid Zerath ship, and now the aliens were starting to fight back with everything they had. The Invincible and its sister ships continued to engage, using their smaller size and speed to outmaneuver the larger alien ships. The human warships darted in and out of the enemy formation, firing quick bursts and then retreating before the Zerath could react. "Captain," Blake said urgently, "they're trying to flank us. We need to move faster." Harris's mind raced. The Zarath were adapting quickly. The humans couldn't keep this up forever. They needed a new strategy. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Harris ordered. "Hit them hard and retreat immediately. We're going to force them into the asteroid field. They'll be too slow to follow us through there." The humans had been tracking the nearby asteroid field for hours. It was a chaotic maze of floating debris, and while the Zarath ships would have a difficult time maneuvering through it, the human warships were small and fast enough to take advantage of it. The Zarath, with their massive ships, would be at a severe disadvantage. The human fleet broke off and sped toward the asteroid field. The Zarath followed, determined to wipe out the small human force. As the human ships entered the maze of asteroids, the Zarath fleet struggled to keep up. The humans were quick, dodging between rocks and debris, while the Zarath ships had to slow down, making them easy targets. The human warships struck again, their weapons punching through the thinner armor of the Zarath ships. Each hit sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet, and Harris could feel the tide of battle beginning to shift. "One down," Blake shouted, her voice filled with excitement. Their rear ship just exploded. "Keep pushing," Harris urged, his voice sharp. "We've got them on the run now." The Zarath, now realizing the full extent of the human threat, began to panic. They weren't used to such resistance, especially not from a race they had considered inferior. The humans, with their smaller, nimbler ships, had found a weakness, and they were exploiting it ruthlessly. The humans launched another series of precise attacks, targeting weak points in the alien ship's defenses. The battlefield, once filled with the oppressive might of the Zarath fleet, was now filled with scattered debris and flaming wreckage. The humans had made their point. They were not to be underestimated. As the last of the Zarath warships retreated, the humans breathed a sigh of relief. The battle was not won, but it was a victory, one that had sent a clear message. The Zarath had not expected a fight, and the humans had given them one they would never forget. But as the humans looked out into the vastness of space, they knew that this was only the beginning. The Zarath would regroup, and they would come back. And the next battle would be even more dangerous. The humans had made their stand, but they still had much to prove. Turning the tide. The humans had won the first battle, but it was only a small victory in a much larger war. As the last of the Zarath ships limped back to their staging area, badly damaged, Captain Harris and his crew stood on the bridge of the Invincible, trying to process the enormity of what had just transpired. The human fleet had delivered a blow to the Zarath, but they had only managed to cripple part of their invasion force. The alien fleet was far larger than the humans had anticipated, and the remaining Zarath warships were more determined than ever to crush them. Harris paced back and forth on the bridge, his mind racing. They had been able to exploit the asteroid field and their speed, but they couldn't rely on it forever. The Zarath would adapt, and they were already regrouping, preparing for the next phase of their assault. The humans needed a new strategy, and they needed it fast. "We've got to hit them before they can regroup," Harris said, his voice tense with urgency. "We can't let them get their strength back." Blake nodded. "But how? They outnumber us by a huge margin, and they've got more firepower. Even with our tactics, we can't keep this up forever." "Agreed," Harris said, pausing to stare out at the stars. "But we can't just wait for them to attack again. We need to strike them where it hurts. We need to hit their command structure, cut off the head, and the body will collapse." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Taking out the enemy's command center wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only chance they had of turning the tide in their favor. The Zarath's command ships were heavily protected, but Harris was confident they could get in close enough to deal a devastating blow. Harris turned to Blake, who had been analyzing the data from the previous battle. "Lieutenant, I need a plan. I want to know where their command ships are, and I want to know how we can reach them undetected." Blake immediately got to work, her fingers flying across the control panel. "I've been tracking their movements. The Zarath fleet has split up into smaller groups, likely to repair their ships and regroup. Their command ship is in the center of the fleet, heavily guarded, but it's surrounded by a formation that's not as tight as it was earlier. We might be able to sneak past them. Harris nodded. Good. We take our best ships and go in fast. We strike with everything we've got, hit their command ship hard, and get out before they have time to react. This is our best shot. The tension on the bridge was palpable as Harris issued the order. Every human warship would play a role in the attack, but the Invincible and 2 other ships would lead the assault. They would break through the gaps in the enemy formation, strike the heart of the Zarath fleet, and create enough confusion to allow the rest of the humans to retreat. The plan was risky, but it was their only hope of turning the battle in their favor. As the human fleet moved into position, the reality of the situation set in. This would be their most dangerous mission yet. If they were successful, they could cripple the Zarath's ability to lead and coordinate their attacks. If they failed, however, it would be the end of humanity's resistance. The time had come. The human warships cut through space like ghosts, avoiding detection as they slipped past the alien ships. The Zarath were still recovering from the initial skirmish, their warships scattered and damaged. They were not prepared for this kind of strike. The humans moved with deadly precision, weaving in and out of the Zarath fleet's defensive formations, each ship dodging fire and staying out of sight. We're in position, Captain, Blake reported. Target locked on the command ship. All ships, fire on my mark, Harris ordered. The human fleet opened fire. Precision strikes hit the command ship's weak points, targeting its communication arrays and power sources. Explosions erupted across the alien ship, throwing its defenses into chaos. The Zarath, caught completely off guard, scrambled to mount a defense, but it was already too late. The humans had breached their command ship's outer defenses, and now their attack was relentless. The battle was a blur of fire and explosions. The Zarath retaliated quickly, but they were disorganized. The humans were like shadows, striking from unexpected angles and hitting the aliens where they least expected it. The command ship was severely damaged, and the entire fleet seemed to go into disarray. Direct hit, Blake shouted. Their command center is offline. We've disrupted their control systems. Harris felt a surge of hope, but he knew the job wasn't done. The humans had delivered a devastating blow, but they had to escape before the Zarath could regroup. All ships, retreat, Harris barked. We've done what we came to do. Fall back to the secondary position. Now, the human warships, battered but still operational, turned and sped away, retreating into the asteroid field once more. The Zarath, in chaos, were unable to follow immediately. Their command ship was crippled, and without it, their fleet was scattered. The humans had dealt a crippling blow to the heart of the Zarath Empire. The victory was hard-earned, but it was the turning point. The humans had proven they could strike at the heart of the enemy and survive. They had gained the upper hand, even if only for a short while. But Harris knew one thing for certain. This war was far from over. The Zarath would return, and the humans would be ready. As the fleet withdrew, Captain Harris stood at the bridge, staring out into the vastness of space. The battle had changed the course of the war, but the ultimate fight was still ahead. The humans had shown the Zarath that they would not be easily defeated. They had sparked a fire, and now it was time to see how far it would spread. The final push. The humans had struck a powerful blow to the Zarath, but they knew the battle was far from over. Despite their tactical advantage, the Zarath were regrouping, their remaining forces quickly consolidating. The Zarath were proud and relentless, and they would not allow a single defeat to break their confidence. They would come for the humans again, and this time, they would come harder. Captain Harris knew that the next encounter would be the deciding one. He and his crew were ready for a full-scale conflict, but the stakes were higher than ever. The humans had fought to survive, and they had succeeded, but now they had to push forward and finish what they had started. There was no room for failure. The command center of the human fleet was bustling with activity as the final preparations began. Harris stood in front of a holographic map, watching the movements of the Zoroth fleet. The aliens were closing in, their forces massing for a decisive attack. The humans had only one shot left to win this war. "We've caught them in the open," Blake said, pointing to the map. "If we move quickly, we can intercept their rear fleet and take out their last remaining supply ships. Without those supplies, the rest of their forces will crumble." Harris studied the map, his mind racing. "We hit them where it hurts. Focus all fire on their weak spots. No mercy. We need to break them before they get the chance to regroup." He turned to his officers. "This is it, people. This is the fight that will decide everything. We either win or we don't get another chance. Make sure your ships are ready. No mistakes." The human fleet moved out, slowly but steadily positioning itself for the final assault. As they approached the Zoroth fleet, Harris couldn't help but feel a surge of nervous energy. The risk was immense. The Zoroth still outnumbered the humans by a significant margin. But this time, the humans had the advantage of surprise. They had already crippled the command ship, and now they could finish the job. The first wave of human warships moved in, darting around the larger Zoroth ships with surprising agility. The alien fleet was still recovering from the previous attacks, and they were not fully prepared for the human onslaught. As the humans closed in on the supply ships, the Zoroth scrambled to form defensive lines. But it was too late. The human ships were already on top of them. "Fire!" Harris barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Invincible and the other human warships unleashed their full power, targeting the supply ships and their vulnerable areas. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as Zoroth ships were torn apart in quick succession. "One down," Blake shouted as a massive explosion rocked the enemy fleet. "They're starting to scatter." The human warships pushed forward, exploiting every gap in the Zoroth's defenses. The aliens tried to retaliate, launching waves of fire back at the humans, but the human fleet had become like a swarm of hornets, unpredictable and relentless. The Zoroth were no longer organized. They were losing their grip on the battle. Harris watched as more of the Zoroth ships fell. Their supply lines were cut, and their once mighty fleet was crumbling. The humans had the upper hand. There was no turning back now. "We've got them," Blake shouted, her eyes wide with excitement. "They're retreating." But Harris knew the war was far from won. The Zoroth would not just give up. They were a proud species, and they would fight to the last. Harris's heart raced as he turned to face his crew. "Prepare for the final assault," Harris said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. "We finish this now." The remaining Zoroth ships, disorganized and vulnerable, tried to flee, but the humans were relentless. The human warships pursued, cutting through the last of the enemy's forces with surgical precision. The Zoroth were falling back in disarray, and the humans had finally broken through their defenses. As the final wave of attacks rained down on the last remaining Zoroth warships, Harris felt a surge of triumph. The enemy was in full retreat, their once mighty fleet shattered. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of the war, and they had done it against overwhelming odds. But Harris knew there was no time to rest. The war was over for now, but the survivors of the Zoroth fleet would regroup and plan their next move. The humans had proven their strength, but they knew that the next challenge could be even greater. They had fought for their survival, but the real work was just beginning. As the last of the alien ships turned to flee, Captain Harris stood at the command center, looking out into the void. His heart was filled with both pride and caution. Humanity had won this battle, but they would have to stay vigilant. The war was far from over. The Zoroth would never forget the humiliation they had suffered. And next time, the fight would be even harder. But for now, the humans could celebrate their victory. They had shown the galaxy what they were capable of. They had proven that they were not a species to be underestimated. And as the fleet moved back to Earth, Harris allowed himself a small, weary smile. "We've done it," he muttered to himself. "We've shown them what humanity is made of." Victory and consequences. The battle was over. The Zeroth fleet, once a terrifying force, had been shattered. The humans had achieved the impossible, not just surviving, but striking back with such force that the alien invaders had been forced to retreat. It was a victory that would echo across the galaxy, but it came with a heavy price. Captain Harris stood at the bridge of the Invincible, looking out into the cold expanse of space. The human fleet, battered and scarred, had made it through the final assault. The damage to the ships was significant, and the crew was exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment, of having accomplished something monumental. They had not only defeated a superior force, but they had also sent a message to the galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Harris turned to his crew, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. Some of them had lost friends in the battle, others had seen their ships take heavy damage. But all of them had come through together. And now, they were alive to see it. "Report," Harris ordered, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. Blake, who had been working tirelessly at the command panel, looked up. "We've done it, Captain. The Zeroth are retreating. Their remaining ships are scattering, and their command structure is in disarray. The rest of their fleet is crippled. They won't be back anytime soon." The crew let out a collective sigh of relief. The immediate danger had passed, but Harris knew better than to think it was over. The Zeroth might be gone for now, but their pride would not allow them to stay down forever. They would regroup, and when they returned, they would be stronger and more vengeful. Harris looked out into the stars once more, the weight of their victory heavy on his shoulders. "We've won this battle," he said quietly, "but the war isn't over. The Zeroth will be back, and next time, they'll come with everything they have." "Do you think they'll attack again?" asked one of the officers, his voice filled with concern. "I don't think they'll attack immediately," Harris replied. "But make no mistake, they'll be preparing. They'll be planning their revenge, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Blake nodded. "We've got a chance to rebuild and regroup, Captain. We can prepare for their next move." Harris turned back to the map of the galaxy. The humans had been victorious, but they had made many enemies during the battle. The Zeroth might have been the most immediate threat, but there were other alien species watching, taking notes. Humanity had just proven its resilience and its ability to fight back against impossible odds. But that also meant they had drawn attention. "Get the fleet back to Earth," Harris ordered. "We need to regroup, assess our losses, and begin repairs. And while we do that, we need to prepare. The galaxy is watching us now, and we can't afford to be complacent. We'll need new strategies, new allies, and we'll need to stay united. This is just the beginning." As the human fleet began its journey back to Earth, the mood shifted from victory to cautious optimism. The battle had been won, but there was no time for celebration. Humanity had proven it could stand up to the greatest threats the galaxy had to offer, but they also knew that being the victor didn't guarantee peace. The galaxy was vast, and many unknown dangers still lurked in the darkness. In the following weeks, Earth began to heal. The cities that had been damaged in the initial assaults were rebuilt, and new technology, inspired by the alien warships they had salvaged, was put to use. The human race had come together like never before, united by the common goal of survival and defense. But there was something else that had changed. Humanity had learned something important. They had learned that they were capable of much more than they had ever realized. The strength and resolve they had shown in the face of overwhelming odds had given them a new sense of purpose. The victory against the Zeroth had proven that humanity could stand strong against even the most powerful forces in the universe. As Harris sat alone in his quarters, reflecting on the events that had unfolded, he knew that humanity's place in the galaxy had been forever altered. No longer would they be seen as weak or primitive. The galaxy would now recognize them as a force to be reckoned with. But Harris also knew that peace was fleeting. The Zeroth would return, and other threats would emerge. Humanity would have to be ready. They would have to remain vigilant, always prepared for the next battle. But for now, they could rest. For now, they had earned their victory. And as he looked out into the stars, Harris couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had proven that no matter the odds, they would fight. They would survive, and they would triumph. The war had been won, but the story of humanity's resilience was only just beginning.